Welcome to Impact, the Conversation, a podcast of the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration that brings you strategies and stories advancing the inclusion of people with disabilities. Our guests are the authors of Impact, our long-running magazine that bridges the research to practice gap with professional and personal reflections on what matters most in disability equity today. I'm your host, Janet Stewart. Do you know someone with disabilities who also struggles with addiction? Then the latest issue of Impact is for you. Articles break down the current research into what we know about the intersection of disability and addiction and what we need to do as a field to create better treatment options. Today I'm talking with Nathan Perry, someone with disabilities who's in recovery. Nathan served as an editor for this Impact issue, and he also wrote a very personal story about his addiction and recovery. He's joined in the studio today by his brother Brad and his sister-in-law Amy Hewitt. Dr. Hewitt is also the director of the Institute on Community Integration, which publishes Impact. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here today. Nathan, you share in your article about how addiction came into your life and how, after several attempts, you have stayed sober for 8 years. And congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Can you share with us just very briefly a little about how you first knew that this was something that was going to be a battle in your life, and then a little bit about the recovery?
Well, I think that, as I stated earlier, when I was first seeking treatment for addiction, I wasn't taking it seriously. I still in my mind thought that I had it under control and went through the emotions. Like when, my drug and alcohol counselor asked me, if I drank at all, I'd said nope when the night before I drank, and it took 4 treatments to get it under control. When I got to the 3rd treatment, I started realizing that maybe I do have a problem, but still went through the motions. And then during the 4th treatment, I accepted that, yeah, I do have a serious issue and that I had to take it seriously and make it work for my health and for living with the family and everything.
Now, what you talked about is very similar to what everyone in recovery talks about. It's very common for anyone who is in recovery to have relapses. So that's no different with or without disabilities. Are there things that you think would have been more helpful if you had had access to them, something that was a little more informed about disability?
Well, going through my addiction and everything, I felt that I felt kind of alone and isolated. Even though I wasn't alone and isolated, it still felt that way because I still did not completely understand the mechanisms of addiction and was dealing with some rather serious personal problems. And with having a disability like autism, which I have, it can be very daunting and not understanding everything that is happening. Luckily, I had Brad and Amy to help steer me, but still, it was a real battle because I felt um, that I was alone, even though I wasn't alone. Um,
So, a deeper understanding maybe of the actual steps to go through the recovery process, but then also addressing the other issues like loneliness, for example,
mm,
would have been helpful.
yeah.
And then you also served as an editor for this issue, and when we were talking about what we wanted this issue to be, you mentioned something that no one else did, and I was really impressed by that, but the idea of better aftercare once someone is on the road to recovery, has is not in active addiction, suffering active addiction right at the moment, the idea of following up with care long after the recovery process starts. What do you think is what would you have wanted in that realm?
Well, when I was going through recovery, going through treatment, one thing I noticed, and I did talk about with my counselors, is that there really was no aftercare. You go in, you go through treatment, and then pretty much you're on your own. It's up to you to make connections on how to continue that. Um, I did use AA and everything, but a lot of people that I have talked to also did not have really a firm path to where to go afterwards. Um, I did have success in AA. I was there for 5 years or so, going once a week to a neighborhood AA meeting. Um, then COVID hit, and then it just kind of fell off the track because they don't do it in person anymore. Um, One of the things that I did learn, and I have to keep a real close eye on, is environment and triggers and stuff like that. So I kind of made my own toolkit on how to deal with this. Whatever happens, I cannot drink. My body won't tolerate it. My family won't tolerate it. So I have to seek other supports when I get upset.
Amy, you've spent your career dedicated to the self determination and inclusion of people with disabilities in their communities, and things like dignity of risk are things that you believe in very staunchly. In your article, you talk about wanting to preserve that as you work with Nathan and try to support him in this recovery process. That can be really difficult to actually, to say it is one thing, to live it is tough when you've got somebody going through addiction. You talk about this in your article, but can you just sum up a little bit about how you did that and how you were able to preserve things like dignity of risk and preserve choices even when your tendency might have been to protect Nathan and not let anything, not let anyone in or not let anyone be involved with him anymore. What kind of went through your mind with that?
It's always challenging, and I think your statement was right on. Like it's easy to conceptualize and to have all these theories, but when it's you and your family's being affected, that's harder to sort out. It's easier to advocate for a full group of people, but one of the things we know is being person-centered is critical in this field, and that means the person wherever they are and in whatever context they're in. And so for us, it's just a constant balance of here are the things Nathan wants to do or is doing, and letting him experience those natural consequences. And in the case of his addiction, eventually it became we were a natural consequence, and his ability to live with us became a natural consequence because we just couldn't have that exposure with our children anymore. It had gotten too far, gone too far. And so it's just that constant. We could talk about a number of issues where it's important for Nathan to be able to make his own decisions, and we need to be there to support him, but not to the extent that he can do whatever he wants that's going to affect us or our family. So it's hard.
I am 8 years sober, but I feel incredibly guilty about what I exposed my family to, and in particularly the kids. And I'm quite angry at myself for doing that. I wasn't involved in their lives a lot of times when they were younger and everything, and I resent it. Um, and just there isn't kind of a day that goes by to where I kind of have a thought or two. It's just like, oh my God, why did I do this? You know, um,
So forgiving yourself is hard, right?
forgiving myself is hard. I have not completely done that yet. It's just going to take time. But I have real regrets about what I put everybody through.
And the addiction didn't just hit at home. Nathan was working here at ICI during this time. Earlier, Nathan and I spoke with Mark Olson, Nathan's supervisor.
My main focus at that point was Nathan's health. And so, yes, there were work-related pieces that I needed to make sure were still being met. But I tried to lead with the grace that could be led with, and support Nathan to find his path that would work where he was dealing with his addiction, and also getting his work done. So it was, there was a balancing act involved. And I want to go back, Nathan, and just, even before you came to me with the diagnosis, I knew something was going on.
How did you know that, Mark?
Well, Nathan, some of the things that would happen is you would have some of that anger that would come out here in the office. I mean, we had instances where we had to talk about those things, and oftentimes we could talk through it, and there was an increase in time that you needed out of me to support you through that at those times. But then the real indicator for me was if Nathan had a bad night the night before, he would show up and you could tell in his face, you could tell in how he was taking care of himself, and that you were a little bit unkempt.
And Mark, how was it for you as an employer? That can be a tough road to walk. You're an employer, you're a friend. You want to support Nathan at this time so much, and yet, too, the work has to get done, and all the things that come with that. What was that like for you?
It had its balancing act. It became more difficult for me as Nathan's supervisor to get the focus where it needed to be.
In the end, for Nathan, family support made all the difference. Brad, how's this been for you? Are you, Nathan looks up to you and Amy so much for all that the two of you have done to include him in the family and provide, family leadership and all of that with Amy. Any thoughts kind of going through your mind about what you think really worked or maybe what didn't?
Well, I'll just comment on one of the things Nathan just said a moment ago about the feeling bad and feeling guilty, and he does. But when I hear Nathan talk about that, I have real concrete things that I say to him that he can do for the family, that if he, that would be helpful, that isn't just like, it's tangible things that he can do. So he doesn't just dwell on feeling guilty, which kind of falls on us when he does that. We experience that. Nathan's, in a bad mood because he's feeling bad about himself. So that affects our family that way. So I like to redirect it to something like this would be really helpful, something concrete. that he
That's
can do for the
great.
family.
That's
So
great. And so do you think that builds everybody up and can you kind of make light of it and make some jokes
yes,
out
it's
of it?
definitely a lot of because Nathan doesn't always want to do those things.
Yeah.
So, if you're feeling bad enough, maybe you will.
You take the
So,
trash out,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great, actually, because then and then everyone's participating, right? What a great idea.
One of the things, that, both Amos and Jack are adults now. And I really want to spend some alone time with them and talk to them. And get to know them better. Amos and I are repairing our relationship. Amos had just about had it. And so it's going to take time. One thing that, like I said, Amos and Jack are adults. They have their own places and everything. Is I would love to spend a weekend with them and show them that we can have fun and everything and don't have to worry about, oh God, what's next or that sort of stuff. And I feel that, they're always on guard.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to navigate that on my own.
And I know that's not easy.
No, it's not. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
That'd be tough. Amy, just with your work hat on now for a second, your policy hat, in the issue, we talk a lot about the research, the intersection of addiction and disability, and we talk about some promising programs that are working in this area. But is there something from a policy standpoint that we can, or more of a systemic level that we should be looking at as a field?
I think what happens is we have these silos. We have mental health and substance abuse disorder in a silo, and we have developmental disabilities in a silo. And anytime you're trying to get government agencies to come together with policy or to come together with services, it's hard. And even with mental health. So if you think about Nathan, he has an intellectual and developmental disability. He has a number of mental health diagnoses, and he has substance abuse and is in recovery. So those are all different systems, totally different systems. And trying to get those systems to come together, most mental health professionals aren't really trained to work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Most people who work in the intellectual and developmental disability field know nothing about substance abuse disorder or bipolar disorder or any number of things. So it's really about coming together as entities that deliver services and trying to create policy and trying to create specialists that can cross over all of these siloed categorical groups of people who have needs that they need support for. And that's hard. We're super lucky in the Twin Cities area because we have very concrete, available, accessible substance abuse disorder providers who specialize in supports to people with developmental disabilities and autism. And I think across the country or even across the state of Minnesota, those services just aren't available to people. So as hard as it was for us, we could wrap a lot of support and services around Nathan. So it's not just the substance abuse services that he needed, but he also needed mental health counseling, and he needed his supports for medication and decisions around medication. And we had all that for him, as well as his day-to-day direct support professional staff that are there to help him and who stood by him in really, really, really challenging times where he would become very upset and then take that out on his staff in kind of rage is the word I would use.
Yeah, I would agree. I would concur.
and his staff that would be their time together, would be just him yelling at him and being all angry and mad. But
Did any of them leave?
No, they all stuck with him. I think part of it is Nathan was mad about a circumstance. And so blaming other people and taking it out on other people was a pattern for a long time. And it took him realizing, this is my issue and I've got to accept the responsibility for it. It's not anybody else's fault. It's the cards he was dealt genetically, because there's a strong family history of substance abuse disorder on his side of the family, and he had to accept that. And once he kind of could do that, things came around. But the other thing is, it is common for people to go through treatment many times. I mean, as you said, you hear that from a lot of people who go through treatment. I think the difference is, conceptually, it's hard for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to even understand it. I think of the 12-step program in AA, that's pretty theoretical. And it's very hard. And yeah, Nathan did go to AA, but there were a lot of fits and starts with that, and a lot of different sponsors, and long periods of time where he wouldn't have a sponsor, or he'd get a sponsor and then they'd sort of realize, oh, he has a disability, and then they would just not respond to him and he'd have to start all over.
That brings up a point I wanted to ask you about, because in putting the issue together, we did hear from people, both writing personal stories and from some people in the field, that adapting some of this treatment isn't as maybe difficult as what some substance abuse providers have sort of made it out to be. They sort of throw up their hands and say, we don't have people trained in this area, so we don't offer the service. And folks on the IDD side sort of said, well, that's not good enough. We have people who really need these services. Is that just an excuse, or?
It's bias.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just bias and not wanting to change the way we've always done things so that it works for all people. It's no different than what you do to try to make content so that people with intellectual disabilities can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a similar concept, that you have to adapt things so that they work for people who have different needs, and that just doesn't happen. And if you think about the shortage of mental health professionals in general, substance abuse disorder professionals in general, and then we're asking on top of it to find people who can help support people with intellectual disabilities who also have a substance abuse disorder.
I loved at the end of your article when you talked about some of the lessons learned, and self-preservation being one of them. How did you do that in your own family? How did you make sure that the two of you were okay, your kids were okay? Any tips or things that as you think back to the toughest times really helped in self-preservation?
I think we did a lot of switching off.
I was just going to say tag team.
Tag team, yeah. So one person was, doing what they needed to do to renew themselves, and the other person would be on, dealing with what was going on.
I mean, sometimes it was
sometimes
24
both of us,
hours
yeah,
up,
too.
just making sure he was okay, and dealing with police and ambulances. And if we both were doing that at the frequency that it was required, yeah, we would have been there for each other, but we would have burned out long before we did. So we always tag team, and we've shared that with other families who have kids with complex needs, to trade off. You both don't have to be on all the time. And we would kind of make that almost official, like, this is your time.
Yeah.
Isn't it your time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And I would ask you too, if you want to any wrap-up thoughts, but I guess I just wondered what you would say to someone with disabilities who thinks either they or a family member might have an issue with addiction. Where would you tell them to start?
Well, there's two things. One, they would need to properly get assessed. Because there's all sorts of labels and all sorts of programs that can help. So it's very important to find out what the needs are for the individual, and to match them up with the best services possible. One of the things that was found out is that one of my problems is I had emotional mood dysregulation, and that kind of needed to be worked on before dealt with the treatment process. So getting that assessment and everything done, and to talk to a therapist on top of a drug counselor is vital for both of them to communicate to find out exactly what the individual needs.
It hasn't been mentioned, and I don't think it's, very popular in this country, but you want to look at all the tools that you have available and resources and one of the things that was really helpful with Nathan and for our family was Antabuse. And that really, at times when he was at his worst, that was what kept him on the straight and narrow, of being able to live in our home still. And Nathan's done great work with AA and counseling and all that. But there were times with the impulse control that if there was a really bad day, all that could be out the window. And that's when the Antabuse, kept
Really
him from
helped.
from drinking. So yeah, I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah,
Nathan,
I
or-
will. I've been on Antabuse for
Long time.
a long time, 8 years since the last relapse. And I do at times, in fact, today was one of them, that I was like, man, I really would like to talk to Brad and Amy about getting off Antabuse. I've been 8 years sober. But part of me was like, yeah, but if things were to hit just right and I was not on that, it would be kind of tempting to drink. So I'm like,
I
leave it
100%
alone.
agree
Just
with
leave it
Nathan.
alone.
So it's still a tool that's working.
Yes.
I would add, we didn't hide any of this from people.
No.
That's a tip for other families. It's so common for people to hide their problems, and we weren't willing to do that for Nathan. We weren't going to hide that he was struggling and that it was affecting us. And so it really opens communication and opens expectations. So we never hid it from our kids. You couldn't hide it. It's
No,
very
it's
obvious.
I think all the
Impossible.
neighbors knew they heard it. So, it
But
was
still,
not-
you can act like you're in denial, and
Yeah.
and that you chose not to do, and that really actually brings me to wanting to thank all three of you for the candor that you showed in putting these articles together for our readers. Both you serving as an issue editor and writing your story gave us the opportunity to put together a magazine and then to go out and find other people with the expectation that they would share some difficult stories as well. And they did. And we didn't have a single author request, not using their name. And we didn't want to create that as an expectation in the magazine, because we wanted to say, this is not something to hide away and be embarrassed about. This is something to share and to show leadership in, and you've done that, all three of you, in your own way. So,
And there's really no reason, if you think about it, people have substance abuse disorder. So why would anybody think that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't also have the same risks, the same opportunities, and the same issues? So
exactly.
people need to know it's real and it happens and you can work through it.
I think one of the worst things to do to an individual is for a family to hide it and ignore it, because it doesn't go away. It just gets worse. And with my issue, it was impossible to hide. The entire neighborhood heard me, when I would go off and all that kind of stuff. So
I don't even quite know how to describe that exactly.
I'm not
So-
going to describe it because it's too graphic, but it just, it needs to be brought out into the open, and it needs to be brought out into the open respectfully, and not to be used as or seen as shame or a weakness. That's very, very important.
And what recovery's done for Nathan is it's brought back his laughter. He's very funny, and humor is a way that we've always gotten along and survived as a family. But when he was actively using, there was no laughter. There was no humor. It was
No.
all anger.
He was
and-
not Otis from the Andy Griffith Show, the happy town drunk at all. that wasn't Nathan.
But I think it's nice to see the humor back.
That's great.
It's nice to hear that from you. Still, there's a hell of a lot of work to continue, but I think I've made pretty significant progress. So, and I always have to keep my guard up. Always.
Thanks for joining the conversation. If you'd like to reproduce all or part of this podcast, please email icipub@umn.edu.
Our show is co-produced at the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration by Impact Managing Editor Janet Stewart and ICI Media Producer Pete McCauley. Skylar Mihailov is our editor. Graphic designers are Connie Burkhart and Sarah Kurtner. For more information on the Institute and all of our products and projects, please visit ici.umn.edu.